Hi, and welcome to the fifth event in the Davis Museum's Virtual Artist Talk series, Handmade Photography Today. Tonight, we welcome the artist Zohra Opoku, who will be speaking about her work and applying identity politics to her exploration of cultural memory in Ghana and photographs printed on natural fabrics. And now I'd like to begin with a native land acknowledgement. The Davis Museum at Wellesley College is located on the ancestral and unceded tribal lands of the Massachusetts people. We acknowledge the continuing presence of the Massachusetts and their relatives and neighbors, the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples, and pay respect to Indigenous elders, past and present. And for the Zoom webinar procedures, to participate in today's program, please note that this event is being recorded and will be made available online in the coming days. We are using a webinar format and your microphone and video have been turned off during the presentation. Throughout the event, you can use the Q&A box to enter your questions and to upvote other questions. We will leave 20 minutes for questions at the end of the presentation. And the Davis Museum is grateful to the Burns Schwartz Family Foundation and especially the Foundation's curator and senior advisor, Ann Varick Lauder, for sponsoring the Artist Talk series. We'd also like to acknowledge our co-host, the Photographic Resource Center, and in particular to Jessica Burko, the program manager and curator of the PRC, who has been a wonderful collaborator. And our discussing for the evening is Dr. Amanda Gilvin, the Sonja Novak Koerner 51, Senior Curator of Collections as Assistant Director of Curatorial Affairs at the Davis Museum at Wellesley College. She holds a PhD in art history from Cornell University and is a specialist in the arts of Africa and the African diaspora. At the Davis, she has curated exhibitions that includes Yinka Shonibare, MBE, Guns Drawn, Fragment, a museum's mid-century legacy, and Life on Paper, contemporary prints from South Africa. For the exhibition, Fatima Tuber, Homes Horizons, she was awarded an Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts Curatorial Fellowship and Exhibition Grant. In addition to her museum publications, you can find her scholarly articles in INCA, the Journal of Contemporary African Art, African Studies Review, Critical Interventions, and African Arts.
Thank you for that generous introduction, Arthurina, and welcome to all who are joining us today. This series, Handmade Photography Today, was originally planned to be a day-long symposium organized by Gruber Fellow Carrie Cushman last March. And it was the first of many events that the Davis canceled, of course. And Carrie reconceived the symposium talks as a virtual artist talk series. And I encourage you to watch those held in the fall, which are now available on YouTube, and stay tuned for the future talks over the course of this semester. And I want to take this opportunity to recognize Carrie and all of my colleagues at the Davis who have successfully transformed our programming into dynamic remote events that welcome our Wellesley students currently on campus and the rest of our Wellesley community and many more people who can now Zoom into our conversations from around the world. I also want to reiterate Arthurina's thanks to our sponsor, the Burns Schwartz Family Foundation, and our collaborators at the Photographic Resource Center. And it's a true pleasure now to introduce today's speaker, Zohra Opoku. Zohra is an artist of German and Ghanaian descent based in Accra, whose work spans installation, performance, and lens-based media. Opoku's examination of textile culture, which first brought us together for conversation, considers fashion's political, psychological, and sociocultural role in the formation of personal identities, particularly in the context of contemporary Ghana. Her practice is centered around the rich cultures of textiles that have been an inherent part of West African identity throughout Ghana's layered history and serve as vehicles for her to connect to the abstraction of identity in a tangible way. Her explorations have been mostly through the lens of her camera. Her photography is expressed through screen printing and alternative photo processing on varieties of natural fabrics. In addition to this, she experiments with new and found wood, as well as textiles and garments used in different manifestations of site-specific installations. While her work relays social commentary and broadly relevant themes around the human experience, each of Zohra's explorations is intimately rooted in personal identity politics. She repeatedly integrates family heirlooms and her own self-image into her visual observations of Ghana's cultural memory. She was a 2020 artist in residence at Black Rock in Dakar, Senegal, and also in 2020 received grants and residencies at the New Roots Foundation in Antigua and Guatemala, and a Triangle Art Association artist residency in Brooklyn, New York. In 2018, she received a residency at the Art Dubai residence of the Tashkil Studios. And in 2017, received the inaugural Presents Booth Prize with the Marian Ibrahim Gallery. Her work is collected by many renowned institutions, including the Cleveland Clinic Collection, the Farshu Foundation, the Royal Museum of Ontario, the Samuel P. Harn Museum of Art, and most recently, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. She has exhibited at the Marian Ibrahim Gallery in Chicago, the Musée de l'Ethnographie in Bordeaux, the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao, the Museum for Photography in Chicago, and the Cleveland Museum of Art in Cleveland. And I encourage all of you to look for her exhibition in the upcoming 2021 Athens Biennial, where she will present a selection of her exciting new body of work, The Myths of Eternal Life. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Davis, Zohra, and Zohra is joining us from one of my very favorite cities, Accra, Ghana. So a big virtual welcome to Wellesley.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for your kind introduction. I'm a little bit overwhelmed right now. So I say good morning and good afternoon and good evening, probably too, for wherever you are listening from. Thank you, Amanda, for coming to the studio and starting a conversation. This is like the ideal situation to really engage in my work, and as well as Serena Khan, Arthurina Fears, for having me here in this space and organizing everything so thoroughly. And as well, I have to say thank you to Alisa Wolfe, who was helping organizing and beside Emma McKee from my gallery. Otherwise, I wouldn't sit here. So I'm going to start. I will mostly read the presentation, and I'm going to share my screen. On identity, I decided to speak about something today, what basically drove me into becoming an artist and reflecting on experiences of my personal background. That's, I think, also enough to speak about for half an hour. And if you are interested in more of the technical side of my work, we can also speak about it later. So I'm going to start. I was born in Germany and started to create work in Ghana since 2003, and I'm now living in Accra since 10 years. I describe myself as having a hybrid identity. I would like to elaborate on that and describe how my personal background influences the kind of work that I'm creating today. I'm the daughter of my Ghanaian father, Dr. George Bob Zohra Opoku, and my East German mother, Brigitte Gerda Manis York, who met in 1975 in the former East Germany, GDR, while studying. Behind the Berlin Wall, romance overpowered cultural boundaries. 1 year later, I was born. My father had to return to Ghana shortly after, and my mother was unable to follow, remaining behind the East German Wall. So I was raised by my mother in East Germany without a point of connection to my African heritage until the age roughly of 16, when I started to travel in Europe. Through my art, I'm taking you all along on my journey of self-discovery. My practice aims to encourage deep diving, close looking and immersing themselves in negotiating the contradictions inherently present within one's intimate bond with their selfhood. As a child of the African diaspora, I am left with a sense of longing. For me, it means questioning which of my two worlds, Ghana and Germany, I will ever find rest in relativity. Though my work is celebrated in Ghana, I am also perceived here as other. In the same time, I'm aware that returning to Germany means being perceived as other too. Identity can be as limiting and isolating as it is infinite. And that became my tool of empowerment. It is through art that I push my limitations of my own identities. Okay, no, I can't. Okay, now it works. I studied both fashion, design, and photography. Parts of my work, I do explore the ability to express one's identity. Textiles definitely embody the vehicle with which identity can be actualized. In most instances, the role of textile within my work is fundamental. It brings me satisfaction to handle a piece of cloth and to discover it from different perspectives, like the texture, the history, the age, and how I can bring out the beauty and meaning within a body of work. Concurrently, I have grown so comfortable within my photographic medium and understand that my subconscious mind is always longing to recreate prints I once learned in an analog way. I spent a lot of time in the darkroom at the beginning of my art education, and presently I admire those developed images in particular. They remind me of images from my childhood because those were also black and white. As I survey these images, I travel to the fleeting moments of my past, feeling nostalgic as I work with these new mediums. I have incorporated this aesthetic into my large-scale replicas by using different printmaking processes. I have further developed my methods in screen printing and alternative photo process printing onto textiles, connecting my interest fields wholly. The material literally absorbs the photographic image, demonstrating how in society material can become imbued with meaning, memories, and history. So here you see like two different prints, which are both printed with the same screen, but the left side is printed on a hand wash paper and the right side is printed on fabric. And what I mean with absorbing the image, I really love how textile starts to have a conversation with the image, like the texture is really influencing how the image turns out. And in this case, you see a satin, which is kind of flat also, but still you can see how different it looks to the paper print. Here in a paper print, in a close-up, you can see it is very fine and very clear and almost like a digital print, I would say. And I realized very early that this is too clean for me and too artificial. And I want to become much more engaging in the process and learning how different materials influence my printmaking. The self, in my evolving process, I continued to explore the makeup of the self through various periods of time and cultural spaces in constant dialogue with my surroundings. And in the practice of generating every memento, I'm interested in what is hidden behind an image. Disguise and nature are playing a major role in this work. Portraiture became more important than I ever could have expected in 2015 when I began. In self-portrait, you clearly recreate the self as an exercise for learning, accepting, growing, contemplating, understanding, and healing to become the creator of an universal self where not only me, but others can identify emotions based on similar images I have produced and experiences reflected. The reason I am interested in using greenery and the interplay with hidden or partly covered faces is to keep a level of curiosity about what we cannot see. It stands for an identity constantly changing, adapting, and searching for fitting in. Also to stand out, to become one with the backdrop, to blend in, moving and transcending. That is the embodiment of a global identity. Incorporating elements from my past, I connected new details from my presence in Ghana, such as the sugarcane sticks and the traditional way of joining candy strips to a large piece of cloth. So when I started to create my first exhibitions, I was very much interested in to explore the whole medium as how do I mount and how, like as an experience and not just as showing an image. Also as an experience and reflecting those emotions I want to show or I want to not hide within an exhibition. So here I decided to use a material which is very present in Ghana and which was perfectly for the mounting of my works. This is a photo of the Gallery 1957 from my exhibition Sasa in 2016. At that time, I created these works during my artist residence in California at the Color Art Institute, Berkeley, who mainly provide facilities for printmaking. At that time, I was deeply interested in the flora of California on my morning runs. I became intrigued with the plants, diversity, so different from what I had seen elsewhere. Everything from Middle European plants to tropical plants, grassland and desert plants, all merged together. I love the idea to see a parallel to globalization, how we are merging in different spaces and communities and countries, whether through visiting or immigration or the need of refugees to find a new protected internal. I embrace the idea of how these plants have created their own communities and how have grown into big areas and forests in the Bay. Since I grew up in East Germany without my Ghanaian father, and I now live in Ghana without my mother, I feel there is always the search for a connection to something spiritual, to be able to identify as part of the place, as part of the community. And here in my exhibition titled Sasa, I explored the Ashanti concept of Sasa, which can refer both to a universal energy or a vengeful spirit, using a rich combination of installation and photographic work. I inherited from my father the Ashanti beliefs based on the Akan or Ashanti religion, a mixture of spiritual and supernatural powers, believing that plants, animals, and trees have souls. I only realized in the year 2014 that I have a history of employing methodologies of disguise in my work. It is unintentionally carrying references of the traditional West African masquerade style. That's how I started to unravel my autobiographical threads. Being white in Ghana and black in Germany, I'm facing identity inconsistencies and perhaps find it easier to be in my comfort zone in the form of a disguise. There are different kinds of masks portraying characters from human to animals to a spirit. My so-called body mask portraying family members, referencing how the spirit has presence in things, not knowing at the time that I will get to this point of creating sculptures. It became more clear during the process of working with the wood and the created forms and shapes. It started with the Akbakba mask, a strong, weighty structure, but fragile to collapse. I'm just going back to it so you can see it's the one on the right. I wanted to create an arrangement that could give me the experimental space for self-portraiture experiments. While I was working on it, I felt more like creating a contemporary version of a mask, which can be seen as the resting mask, but in the same time provide a place to hide and to be used to conceal. I aim to create within my photographic methods a dialogue in self-portraiture, a conversation with myself, looking at ways of bearing the mask, a double directional metaphor of my thorough transformation is taking place, indulging the supernatural forces which I wish to amplify, and at the same time allow myself to be transformed by them. I embrace the substance and radiate it to others. Beside the ability to become invisible and to transform, the mask may give me strength, hide my powers, and guard my weakness. Each setup, with the mask goes to aid me to uncover new perspective about myself and the offered, which I explore in this act. So just to give a little bit context, so these sculptures I built in 2014 in the Netherlands at the Jan van Eyck Institute, where I had a half-a-year artist residency. And I not only started falling in love with the medium of screen printing, I also started to intensely work with wood, and in this case, new wood. And I continued working in Ghana with found wood. Actually, I already started before that, and these masks, I'm calling them, or body sculptures, or just sculptures, they representing family members who either passed away, like my grandfather, who's my father, like my stepdad, who is the X-ray mask, and like my mother, which is here on the right. So I basically created something what helped me to understand the space of a family, which was never in that way together as I like set them up in the exhibition. And additionally, I created a book sculpture, which then portrays all these sculptures, and I accomplish it with text. And yeah, it's basically like an art piece itself. And in the end of speaking about the self-portraits, I have here two examples how I have them installed here with the cane stick. It is at the Archaeological Museum in Mykonos, which was a collaboration between the Whitechapel Gallery in London and the Neon Greece in Athens. And yeah, it was part of a group show, and I loved really the group show as well. And I had the chance to actually show 5 of those prints here together. And the very first moment when I showed the screen prints, you can see the sugarcane was not there yet. That was at 154 in New York, represented by Marianne Ibrahim, which was quite a success because it was my first time showing, and it was really successful. And here I wanted to just share with you something what I'm not doing anymore today. I started photographing in color, and then I changed those photographs into black and white and into a screen printing process. We have decided to offer those prints, which is like a fine art print, a pigment print on hand wash paper as well. In addition of 5, but I felt that my process is quite short and not very engaged with the image, and by giving it away to a printer. So I really wanted to create a process where also these analog steps are part of it, and I can more influence also the outcome, and also it becomes more poetic with the textile. So I completely stopped also with the color prints. And that's the very last I took. The Traveler's Tree. It's the second work I want to talk today. It is also very much focused on identity. It is from the series Hybridity. I started photographing on analog film in 2016 in Brazil. And I was not able really to develop this series in print and in the way I would like to. So for now, it is basically what image I'm showing here. This is an examination of my own hybrid identity through an exploration of heritage and a critique of the present immigration crisis. Produced in 2016 during a residency in Bahia in Brazil, this series marked my premier exploration into an analog film. Inspired by the cultural similarities between Brazil and Ghana, I used the traveler's tree as the icon in my work. The traveler's tree is said to align its photosynthetic fan in an east-west orientation. So that means the leaves. And which can serve as a crude compass, allowed weary travelers to orient themselves. In my world, where trees become improvised backdrop, the photos represent a negative and a false positive in terms of the specific photographic process I am using, and figuratively in terms of my sense of belonging and being othered, portrayed by two mirrored trees. The works also feature the image of my German passport, which is standing for the challenge I face to travel freely in the ECOWAS countries of West Africa, but easily within the Schengen countries in Europe, while my adopted son is facing the opposite situation. Means we haven't been able to travel together yet. My personal background manifests in different ways in my former body of works. Also here, my experiences in the former GDR reflecting not only in the research, also in the technical development of the work as well. Through the geographical limitations, I'm looking at reinforcements of citizenship and immigration. Here you can see one of the variations of the Traveler trees works, which is like either as a single tree or as a combination of three images at the Unseen Art Fair, but this was not an art fair booth, it was rather a side exhibition, Woven Matters. And I had the chance to also play again around the narrative and show also imagery and books from my research, which you can see in these little wooden boxes beside. Also, quickly to say something technical, I created this work at the Jan van Eyck, where I was invited again in 2019 to produce work for an exhibition. And I just wanted to show you how perfectly these screens, these tables and the studio looks like while printing. And this was like the first situation I was in. I was pretty much spoiled because everything worked so perfectly. And my mentor and advisor, Margaret Thyssen, who is the advisor in the printing lab, was also quite a perfectionist. So I learned very well from her. Coming back to Ghana, it was like a huge step to start creating something what I experienced before. It was, yeah, a huge challenge. The special part about these works, which I didn't mention before I just printed on different types of cotton and also satin. And then in this case, we actually digged out old linen sacks, trading sacks from Margaret's father-in-law, who was trading coffee. And since it's in Netherlands and also part of the colonial history, I found it very interesting to use these materials with that kind of history for the Traveler tree. And here just a little close-up of the little boxes I represented. This shows my grandparents when they were younger, photographing themselves sitting on the hill, somewhere in Eastern Europe, because that was the only area where they could travel to for holidays. And in terms of traveling, this situation is different now, but by then it was quite limited to where to plan the holiday to. The third work I want to talk about today is Unraveled Threads, and part of probably my biggest achievement, because it is in one hand really reflecting on my personal story, but in the other hand, I really spread out the work and shared the work a lot. And it was also a scale I was challenged, but I wanted to to be able to almost step into the imagery. The series Unraveled Threads investigate the complexities of self-identity, dutifully and quite literally gathers the multiple threads prevalent within my family history and fasten them, aimed at forging connections. I employ treasures items from the past, prized family photographs of my mother and my father, regal pictures as an Ashanti king, fragments of candy cloths, and recent stage photographs with my siblings, which hark back to notions of traditions and affinity to a past, a lineage that often feels just out of reach. Just to show quickly the screens I'm using in Ghana, which are self-built, made out of wood. And as you can see, it's yeah, it looks already very different, and they are, because of the wood, much heavier to handle. And I also stretch the screen on myself. And here you see me sitting with my assistant, Linda, my sewing assistant. And yeah, it's a quite meditative work because everything what I create is only done by hand. Here amongst the large-scale screen-printed fabric cutting cloths that commemorate as much as the question, my journey becomes entangled with others and their similar experiences. In Unraveled Threads, I'm embracing the imprint of arrows, creating during my first screen printing experience in Ghana. As I continue to reflect on these prints, they appear more like paintings. They are becoming a mixture of dreams and my reality, though still somehow blurry, but with George's unraveled threads taken from my mother's private storage, lancing and dancing in the works with images showing the cloths of my father. Candy cloths are centuries-old fabrics, once made of imported silk and reserved for esteemed leaders to don at events of importance. Today, candy is made primarily of cotton, making it accessible to people across the social strata. The photos featured in Unraveled Threads were given to me by my father's youngest children after his death in 2004. The distorted images in the blurred and aged photos are metaphors for my own distance and disconnection from him. These are moments which I was never present and could not completely recreate or understand because my much younger siblings were just too young to really comprehend and hold on these events. I'm learning about him through their memories and the precious few recollections of my mother has, which she created with him as a young woman. All actions of missteps and fault in the screen printing process create parallels with our memories and our own history. It provides the opportunity to unravel what needs to be made visible in order to be in a position of confidence, to appreciate and identify with our common family space where we live today. Therefore, I'm rebuilding a new narrative for all of us, using textile and specifically candy cloths, which disappeared from my father's wardrobe when he died and was later given back to us. So here you can see two different versions. Since I'm a printer, there are editions, but we actually call it variations. That's the variation number one, which has like different kind of fabric and red thread, and that's the variation number two, which is more purely on a light white fabric and also with a black and a blue thread. So I always try to see like the prints are always turning out different. So never a piece is kind of unique. So also with the sewing and also with the way I put the fabrics together, I can always achieve a difference between the editions. So to call it variation. So also the people who are buying it are having basically a unique piece in their hand. And this series, a collection of family photographs showing my father as an Ashanti king, Nana Opoku Guyaba II, Shidoheme of Asatu Akan in the Volta region of Ghana, screen printed on cotton and canvas and interwoven with images of myself, my mother, and pieces of candy clothes. It is a manifestation of my history in material form. For me, the prints resurrect a father I never knew. For historical others, they serve as evidence we were once queens and kings. So I wanted to continue our family narrative with my siblings, and I basically took Junior, who is also my nephew, but my adopted son, and I gave him my father's original cloths from the 70s and placed basically the same like my father here on the right in the image, with the beads and with the cloths wrapped around him traditionally. And I elevated him by repeating one of the prints below to make him look taller. And yeah, it is quite a metaphor of yeah, carrying on the legacy of my father. And again, you can also see the two different variations, how I create with the print, with how I put together the imagery, and how I also use the application of the original clothes on the fabric. So it looks alike but different. Yeah, in the beginning, I incorporated also some funny photographs. This was one of the first pictures I took in Ghana, in the bush, so to say, on the way to Volta region. I had my own kente and wrapped myself in it. So that was one of the first pictures I took in Ghana. And yeah, and I put it into the works because it was about those kente cloths. Here you see on the left my brother, who is the second, it's actually the third born of my father. And he is also wearing one of his kente cloths. And by creating this kind of movement of picture, and the picture shows like, supposed to show a movement of moving forward. And but also how like photographs are like always looked at it when having it in our own hands. On the right you see a self-portrait of myself, and again with a natural disguise. This series has 3 different self-portraits, which I took in the beginning, in the middle, and also in the end of the work. That means it was stretched out within probably a year. The very first is the one on the right, and the second was the one on the left. And both were produced in my garden, which looks quite bushy also. I had a very green garden around my studio, and I also play again with the plants being part of myself. And here, just to emphasize on the difficulties I faced in Accra to actually create a clean negative film for my screen. Very clear on the right side, you can see the lines, which is from the printer. Very often I had someone who developed the screen for me, and it was sometimes like a lottery, you know, like sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And because of the money spent on this service, I decided to still use those screens to print. And yeah, I'm definitely working on to expose my own screens, which means I am building a large exposure table for this. And it will change something, but also you need like a good printer to print the original film, because then once this is a good quality, your print will turn out so differently. Here again, an example of 2 variations. The unraveled threads literally. And as last in our round, we see Deborah, who is the youngest from my father. And she is the one who actually was the leading force in this image, because she knew how to wear the fabric. And to the fabric, I have to say, what I use as application on the right as a full application, on the left just as a extension of my dress, is something what I reprinted to recreate and print my father wore in one of his photographs. But we couldn't find this textile anymore, so we decided to reprint it and then to wrap ourselves into it traditionally. And as always, you have like a lot of challenges. And in this case, I had the surprise that my screen came divided in little sections. So they printed my image in Dyn A3 sizes and puzzled it together. And that's how I started to basically sew within these lines, and it became part of the work. Now I would like to speak about the last project amongst the Unraveled Thread series. I wanted to find a way to create a very unique publication of 100 special books, hand-binded, also representing the thread with an open back. And I used either faulty prints or reprinted prints for this project to create the cover for the book. Yeah, this marks actually my first publication, and what can I say about it? It is an experiment. I would say I really learned from that experience, because I chose an analog way to print the inside of the book, which also shows the imagery of the series Unraveled Threads. And because I already changed from a digital to analog through the screen printing and I photographed it, I shouldn't actually choose a technique to print what then again lets information disappear from the image. So I worked with the Risoprint, which is a printer coming from Japan. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with it. And it is a plant-based ink, which never really dries well, but is very environmental friendly. And it works on the basis of having different plates, and every plate is like responsible for one color. While I was developing the book, I was really excited about it, because I also chose a process which represents my personal process in the studio. But then really looking at the prints, I realized that was maybe in this case not the best choice, because the images lose again on information. But still, it's a beautiful project. I added a hand, like a self-pressed leaf from my garden, from the trees, and also I signed it, and also wrote something with the pencil inside. So it becomes quite an art piece itself. And as you can see here, every print looks different. And those who have the same print on the front then don't have the same print at the back. So that means every piece you hold in the hand is unique. There is none like the other. That was my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zohra. I know I have a lot of questions, and eager to hear more. And we have some additional questions coming in from the audience. I think I'll start by thinking about this series, and why I immediately thought of you for it, and to pick up some literal threads in your work in this first question, which is how the handmade operates in all of these series. You mentioned shifting completely away from these color photographic images because you wanted to hang on to these analog processes because of a certain poetry. And then we heard you mention several times how being able to make something yourself allowed for these different variations. And I would be very interested in hearing more about how your hand making, like through both of this facility of various techniques, but also touch, inform these artworks, which are so deeply personal in a conceptual way too.
Yeah, I believe that it has a lot to do with my upbringing. So I think, like, I mean, we all are influenced by our childhood and by our experience when we were younger. And knowing or not knowing, it is becoming part of our subconscious memory. And some can really like deal with it and handle it and bring it out in their behavior, in their practice, in their everyday life, and some they maybe deny it. For me, it was just a beautiful fact to see how my great-grandmother was already the one who was sewing the clothes for everyone in the family by hand at this time. And also how you have like these old bed sheets, which also became very often also my medium to print on, where you have like the little family name stitched in. And then my grandmother, who was a great knitter and did a lot of embroidery, and the same like my aunt and my mom, who are exploring all kind of different handcrafts. And I was never someone who would maybe sit down knitting or doing something with the hand, but I was observing a lot. And later, when I studied fashion, I had other ways to express myself doing things with the hand, because I really enjoyed pattern making and geometry in the sense of never was going to mess, but I loved how it is logical to create a pattern and draw on a table. And what really was my interest really was scraping on a mannequin and basically working from 3D into 2D. So I think then it really started that I started to learn how to handle fabric and how to choose fabric, because yeah, it has to be smart, because not every fabric is useful for this kind of technique to create pattern or to create, let's say, a couture piece. And when I came to Ghana, I also observed a lot of handcraft with the weaving, and then also the old a joining of candy strips together, which is like so delicately. You can see, like when you see these very old closets, they are very fragile now because they are all just made with the thread, but it's also so beautiful. So I decided to incorporate this, what I knew from my mother's background, and that's what I recently experienced in Ghana, and bring it together.
Thank you. So my next question is about a subject that you and I haven't talked about before, and I think I should have asked about it when I first met you, and I'm really excited to hear more about that you've addressed some, but I want to hear more about plants. And it was really striking to me, even more so looking at the images in advance and then hearing you speak today about just their central significance in all of these series. And I was so inspired to hear you talk about them as these beings with souls, but it's also clear the way that they're operating in your work is as a place of empathy, and we're relating to them, and metaphors for your journey. And and then the plant-based ink in the recent publication, such an exciting way to build on this relationship to plants, which I also see in your use of textiles and the wood, right? Which are, of course, primarily from these plant-based media. So I'm interested in hearing about your garden, your relationship to these plants, and more about why we see plants in such prominent roles throughout these series.
I believe also that that is also part of my, I didn't really choose the plants, the plants really chose me in a way. So when I the very first time saw the house and the garden, where unfortunately I'm not anymore, but I'm now found a new studio with a new garden. It's not as magical, but I believe I can make it very magical because in Ghana everything goes so easily and so fast. I think plants are zen, and I think many of us experience that, like just having like a little plant in our room, because in Germany everything was inside. Basically, you are treating them like, you know, they are part of the family, and the same like in the garden. It was for me always balancing between my work and going in the garden, planting something and grow, and also harvesting or like maintaining it. It is definitely something also what is the same like self-care, like you have, and this is like an exterior self-care by like, you know, having this conversation with nature, the same like interior self-care, like doing meditation and breathing, whatever. I'm pretty much convinced that our lives are much more like rich by you know, looking at like how nature is doing it, and how nature is also naturally so just beautiful. And I don't I didn't really plan on this. It really happened naturally. So yeah, I think it's just part of me. And also my mom. My mom is from the countryside, and always, you know, was it was always important for her to have a garden. It's, yeah, it's easy also.
I even noticed the greenery in those wonderful images of your grandparents, right?
Yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, and I think also I now come to a level where I think about plants in sacred groves. So that is like one of my next projects, to actually discover the communities within the sacred groves who are then also protecting the nature, not only the nature, but also the spirits living there, because it is either a religious reason or it is environmental protection reason that those places, forests, or whatever we are dealing with are protected by communities. So I'm really much interested in how those communities are navigating this space.
Great, thank you. And then I wanted to talk a little bit more about the textiles and the found wood in your work and how they relate to photography, because I'm interested in this tension between how you referred to at one point to the plants as a natural disguise, and there are certain ways of obfuscation, you know, these moments of hiding in your work, but you also describe it as revealing hidden histories, right? And we see the photography being printed on these textiles, which have histories of their own, right? That I have interacted with different people in their own, what we might call an object biography over time. Can you speak a bit more about the relationship between the textile and the wood and the photography as they reveal and hide aspects of your personal but also broader histories?
I think with the wood, pretty much started in the beginning when I saw like really these improvised houses and shops and bars, and like everything what I saw in an urban space was quite like like an installative, and it has this had this feeling of, like, for me, very arty, but then of course other people would say, why do you think this is beautiful? And I really started thinking about how wood is nailed to each other and how it becomes a rhythm of a pattern. And so I was pretty much focused on collecting wood on the roadside, and then recreating a pattern what comes from Ghana, which is speaking like the old history of Ashanti culture. So I painted the partly designs of Kente onto the wood. So it's basically I connected like this the old with what is contemporary in Ghana, and then I also had in numerous places I had installations with those. That was in the very beginning, and don't ask me how I did it. It was just like this driving thing to think about textile in a very different way, because I think I also missed a lot traditional textiles appearing on a daily basis. A lot is disappearing or just appearing through ceremonies and festivities, and so I felt like it should be more incorporated into the daily life, and I think that's the reason why I started with that.
Thank you. So I'll ask one final question before we turn to our audience's questions today, which is about travel, both its possibilities, but also restrictions on it. Because, so much of your biography is rooted in your parents' travel, but then politically cause restrictions on it. And your current practice, over the last few years, all of our travel is newly restricted, of course, in this last year, but you've done multiple of the prestigious residencies around the world, and as well as traveling for talks and other parts of the global art world. How are those experiences shaping the concept of travel in the work, but also you also mentioned certain restrictions on travel for yourself and your family, and of course we're all facing new complications. How are these experiences of travel finding their ways into your conceptual explorations about movement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe I'm actually a very lucky, privileged person regards to travels, because I have a German passport. So that didn't mean I want to complain, but it is definitely funny that, like, here where I chose to have my home, once I want to step over the next border, I have to apply for a visa, and it's also a little bit complication with my name, because I got a German name in Germany, East Germany, because the Ghanaian name Zohra Opoku was just not was permitted, and then I was in the end choosing Zohra Opoku since I'm 16 in all the things, creative things I'm doing. And nowadays you can actually have those names, like you can apply for it to have it in your German passport as well. But I think the travel restriction is not so much of my problem, but I see it a problem for a lot of other artists, or Ghanaians in general. I was going through it with Junior, so I could really had like this one experience, and it's not really pleasant. And I had several times the situation of artists who are invited by an art space and a residency and exhibition, who had to fight for the visa and sometimes wouldn't be able to travel. and how this influence, yeah, I think it's something we all like learn right now in a very different way, to actually be more traveling in our minds and traveling, with things we are doing at the location where we are at. There were a lot of moments last year where I was not able to travel, I stuck, but then I saw it as a gift to be stuck and to say, this is the moment I create work, instead waiting that I travel again, right? And I think this is how we all should see it. I mean, luckily we are able to connect via internet, but it's also something we really have to learn patient and learn also to appreciate, like where we are. It's like really like where, where we should like enjoy and appreciate the space, and not thinking about what we can't do at this particular moment. And so the traveler's tree basically represents a lot of emotions for me. Like on one hand, something what reminds me of being taken away from Africa and had to travel to the States, in terms of in slavery, but then also in terms of plans that there are similarities wherever you come. You can find something what gives you the space of home, and in this case it was the traveler tree. And because of the name, it's also funny because it's something what we all embrace, but but who actually can do it? And it's a very small part of the world, basically. So that's why I thought it's really interesting to use the traveler's tree as a name, literal, and then also as the metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely. We think of trees as something that does stay still, right? And challenges
Found it, yes.
challenges us in that regard. Let's turn to a couple of audience questions, and I encourage everyone to keep typing them in. But from Christmas Santos asks, as you've shown today, you started with really rooted in photography and now work across media. But self-portraits have remained an important genre in your work. It's really interesting. So we've heard you describe, how you're exploring your self-identity, but does making the work then impact your self-identity as you shift your self-portraits? Do they then also influence your understanding of your own identity?
Oh yeah, totally. I think like every process leading to a body of work is like completely shifting also my perception of identity, who I am, because I mean, identity is a very fluid concept, right? Like that's what I also meant. Like when we are here in a particular space, we are not able to travel out. We are someone, and we are probably so different to a different space where we would then find new roots, because it's always the environment where we find ourselves in. So with that saying, working on a body of work is like, it's an evolving process of really understanding what do I want to say. As I mean, it's a conversation with yourself, and I think artists have it a lot in their studios, if they speak to them or not. But it's something you learn that after completing a work, you feel different, you are different, and I mean that's also part of the growth as an artist, right? And I think I'm very grateful for being an artist, because I don't think I would have been able to find this much confidence and solutions in how I want to navigate my own personal space, and how I want to where I want to be and with who I want to be if I wouldn't be an artist. So it really gives me a lot of space of reflection, and also changing my mind or learning a lot. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So, The next question is about, I think, the politics of the work, you mentioned environmentalism, so perhaps this is also about any related political work, they mentioned a special interest in secondhand clothes and how photography and film may impact the politics that you are pursuing or see reflected or not in your work.
Photography and film of my own work or from the outside world?
I think you can choose which seems relevant as far as around of the, I believe I'm reading the question correctly about your political work. So so the politics of your artwork and how your photography, whether of yourself or of other subjects, reflect a certain politics or not.
I mean, I definitely, and I mean, in the self-portrait series and also in the Hamatan series, where I have another self-series and I engage also a lot with female Muslims, I see it always as a way of empowerment and placing yourself not just as a woman, as a human being, being like you can choose, you know, how much you want to share, and you can choose how much you want to keep for yourself, especially as a Muslim woman. The symbol of the veil, my disguised pictures, where I always play with the identity, what is visible, what do we want to reveal, what do we want to keep for ourselves. It is definitely in our own power, and that's I think it's very important that we can choose it also in real life. That we never, you know, we have the power to make our own decisions and to be that person with the brown color, with the black skin color, and so on, the way we want to be and where we want to live. And I think my experience growing up in a very white Germany, and then coming to a very black Africa, is already like a symbol of you can be anywhere, but you have to understand yourself, and the self is like it's a start, and from there you have the thread in your hand. So yeah, it's definitely like a political message on like empowerment. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's it's I really appreciate hearing that it's a strong statement of its political and anti-racist message. Thank you. Oh, here's an important question, and I have a follow-up question to it. Is there a way for us to get a copy of this book? Are any still available? An anonymous attendee asked.
It's available through the gallery. Marian Ibrahim is selling them. Yeah.
And you mentioned this is your first publication. Why was this important? And I'm interested here again in hands, thinking about people handling your work.
I mean, it's not really the first publication, but I would say then when I had my artistic career, then it was my first, or like as a visual artist. Before I had also something else out, but it is a very important piece in terms of also giving it to people who, for instance, wouldn't be able to afford a piece of art, but who are still interested in the medium of print and photography and in this particular series. And also it really resembles also how I want to, how can I say, how I want to emphasize on how necessary it is to be very particular in choosing details, which I wouldn't call design, which I would call like a personal note to everything, which like us as an artist is our witchcraft basically, because what we give into the work, the spirit, the soul, it's like that's what you hold in the hand. And with this book, I wanted to create something like this, so it really feels also to have a special piece and not just something what is industrial printed.
Great, thank you. Farouz El-Tam asks, you mentioned the word hybrid in speaking about your identity. Do you find that you turn to this hybridity to bring together or perhaps even unite? If so, are the sewing marks that connect your imagery a metaphor for this, i.e. connection?
Yeah, I have a very good friend. She always says to me, "You're so German." And then I come to Germany, "You're so Ghanaian," you know. So that's both sides a compliment, because the way I was raised and then also the way I make my experience here. Um, I wouldn't necessarily say it's completely a merged, or being friends, because it can be very contradictory to be German and Ghanaian in the same time. But you are actually seeing the advantages of those different cultural backgrounds, and also what you learned from each culture can really help you to like appreciate yourself, and also to deal with all kinds of people, because it's a complete different energy, the German and the Ghanaian. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I will invite others to put in questions as I will follow up to one of the responses that we just heard from you, and give people another minute or two to enter questions. With it, which you mentioned in your talk and just now, the importance of the supernatural. And can you expand a bit more on that aspect of the human experience? Your work is so tactile, but also it invites us to think about what we experience that is not sensory in the same way.
It is not
Sensory in the same way, right? Whether it's our relationship to our ancestors and history, or other kinds of religious experiences, they may be felt through our senses and physically, but perhaps other ways as well.
Yeah, I think what is interesting, I have the two sides to look at it, because also from the German side, my mom and my grandmother are not completely out of this thinking, because both are thinking about spirits, or believing in spirits, believing of the craft, the power of the moon, and then coming to Ghana, the belief in spirits and energies around us. I really like the idea, but then also we have to be careful what kind of spirit we invite in to be with us. And for a very long time, I had the feeling that my father was still around, because the way he left, it was not natural. He was sick, but then we also believed if it might sound funny, but he died a spiritual death. And we were searching for the reason why he had to go that way. And that actually made me also to rethink the concept of a spirit, and also researching on different kind of spirits, and calling the exhibition in Accra Sasa, which when you basically read on it, you find a Western concept of Sasa explained by an academic, and you find different ways of explanations of spirits from Ghanaian academics, but you would never find like a mutual explanation that you can say, okay, this is Sasa, or this is what I'm talking about. So speaking of that, I created the installation in Accra by looking at different forms of spirits, of how colors are defined in Ghana, how like the mother and the father are giving different things to the child. So by actually writing this on wooden boards, again, found wood, in the exhibition, I actually emphasized about, this is not just an exhibition about like being disguised and, you know, finding ourselves or dead family members. It's about the spirits we have around us, and those things we don't see, but we can feel it. And a lot of people don't really talk about it, but I think a lot of us had an experience where we could see or feel something, we couldn't explain it. And with my father, for a long time, I had the impression he's around and protecting me. I had a lot of situations where I was like, this is more than luck. So the unnatural becomes the natural in the way, you know, and you, because you, when you are here, you have priests and you have shrines and you have the traditional religion going along the Christianity and all the other religion being here in Ghana, and it feels normal here and not so supernatural anymore.
Great, thank you. Several more. My call inspired several more questions. Nora Mishanek asks if you can explain the process of staging your portraits.
Staging for the process of photographing it, or for the process of?
I think so. I'm understanding that as the photographic aspect of it, when you're taking the photographs of yourself and your family members.
So normally I don't like to do styling, or I don't like to stage too much, so it should not look too fashionable, and also it shouldn't look too created. It is more like a natural process. I always try to find a natural environment, and also in this case it was mainly family members, so we are also familiar, and it is easier to work with someone you know. I'm a conceptual artist. Sometimes I know what I want, but sometimes I just let it be and then see what happens in a particular situation. While when I'm working with others, I want the other person mainly to be comfortable and to also contribute to the photo, since it is also connected to my research. It's not about creating a beautiful image, it is about creating that energy and showing that textile, or being a part of the whole idea. So I definitely try not to make too much fuss about how looks the hair, or how is, you know, like those little things. I'm not interested in doing that. But for my self-portraits, it is a little bit delicate, because if you would do it yourself with the remote, very often, like when you have the automatic focus, it is focusing on the plant and not on you. So I had like different experiences also working with the remote. So, but very often I didn't get what I wanted. So mostly I have then a assistant who is then like placed in that picture the way I want to be placed later. And also making sure that the assistant is not too tall or too small. So like you really have to look, this is the particular frame I want to take. And I think I'm very classic and boring actually with my photos. I'm not really like a photographer. I'm really seeing something else in that scenario, not like a photographer, like angles and light. And I'm pretty much a fan of daylight, which is like a good light early morning or very late afternoon. And yeah, and then trying to then me replace myself into the picture, and the assistant then press the button. So that is how it works with the self-portrait. It's pretty.
So Oku Tete has a couple of biographical questions. I know we'd all love to hear what you remember or a memory about your first visit to Ghana as a teenager.
Yeah, it was not a teenager. I was already 27. So it was very late. I think I got all the letters my father wrote when I was 18 from my mom, and like really facing reality. This is my father. That's why I'm like that. And my mom also waited quite a long time because she was also a little bit worried that I would leave her and go to Ghana too early. But for me, it was basically like a long process I had to take in, like digesting those letters, which were wonderfully written by my father. And you could really see that he is missing us and is really sad about the situation they are in, and addressing also my grandparents and so on and so on. It was very emotional. So I put them to the side, and then later when I make my diploma project, I decided to go to Ghana. And people were like, "Are you sure? Do you really want to go?" I have a lot of Afro-German friends who are also having like a Ghanaian background. They never visit and they never wanted to visit. They just say like, "No, I'm German," and that's it. And for me, it was like I want to use the chance of creating this work by really understanding where I come from. So I made a little magazine called Remember Where You're From, which was mainly the start of my artistic career, because I was invited with this magazine to art book fairs and from like an art house, like a art space, and not knowing that this is, it is very avant-garde and very artistic. And I just wanted to share my story, but then also look into those spaces of Afro-Germans who I interviewed. I made a series influenced by Ghanaian fabrics and German symbolism of the GDR. So I really created like an exchange of both my backgrounds by going to Ghana and meeting my father. When I met my father the first time, it was a day just in tears. I mean, I went to Volta region, and it was very overwhelming because he is also a traditional leader. So that means he is in the middle of the whole community, and they had to prepare me before I could see him. And then when I finally saw him, there were like masses of people around us, so we were not alone. And so it was quite overwhelming. I was crying the whole day. I couldn't stop. But then the first words my father said to me were in German. It was a perfect German, and I was like so shocked. Like, I'm coming here to Volta region, somewhere in the bush, in a village, and then my father is like speaking the German with me. I was like, wow, this is intense. But meeting my father the first time, and also unfortunately the last time, because then the year after he passed away, was probably one of the most important moments in my life, because I could really understand this is me also, and I didn't want to deny it, but I also couldn't find it so easy, because like just to go from Germany to a different country, continent, and not knowing what you expect was was an experience.
Yes, and Oku has a follow-up question about how relocating to Ghana was a different decision than visiting, right? How has relocating to Ghana changed you on a personal level?
I think, I mean, in the end, when I now think about it, I don't even know how it all happened, but I was going back and forward every other year, and I really felt after a while I think the first time like digesting Ghana was heavy. It was heavy, like the personal experience, the cultural experience. I literally had a cultural shock. I was before in traveling in Asia and in Thailand, and so it was like, you know, different. But yeah, just with the personal story, and it was quite a long time I had to like sit on it. But when I came back, it felt like, okay, I'm coming back. I know already things. And then I came back again and back again. And until I had my first project in 2009 or 8 or 9, I can't actually remember, at the KNUST University in Kumasi. And then I think from this moment on, when I really made friends in Ghana, like outside my family business, like really having my own little network, and I really understood I can have a life here, you know, I can have friends here. And so then going back again and coming back, I could see those friends, you know. And then when I finally decided I don't want to come back to Germany, I want to come back to Ghana and only visit Germany, then I created a master plan. How do I do it financially? How do I do, you know, with like my work, my family, and you know, all these kind of things. I mean, it's definitely a decision, but it takes time, and then everything falls in place. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this talk today, and really for the generosity of your work as well, and how much you share of yourself in your work, and for extending that to our conversation today. I really appreciate learning from you, and to learn more about your work, which I've admired for some years. So I really appreciate that you were with us today. I want to also thank our sponsor, the Bernd Schwartz Foundation, again, as well as the Photographic Resource Center. And we've had some really important contributions today from 3 of our student employees, Ryan Rowe, Lexi Fitzgerald, and Regina Gallardo. And Arthurina is going to come back with a little more information as well.
All right, thank you so incredibly much, Zohra, for sharing your work, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. So the Handmade Photography Today Virtual Artist Talk Series continues through the spring, next taking place on Thursday, April 22nd with Gerardo Suter, Thursday, May 13th with David Benjamin Sherry, and Wednesday, May 26th with Pushpamala N. And we hope you can join us again. Thank you so much.